From Tidal Health Group, this is Health Impressions, where we break down healthcare marketing strategies for consumer brands with industry experts. I'm your host, Bryan Cush. Kirsten, welcome to the show. I feel like we've known each other a long time and kind of two ships in the night keep missing. So I'm really glad to get on and talk to you. And I'd love you just kind of a quick introduction of yourself and kind of your background. And it's a diverse one in healthcare.
Yeah, no, I was so happy to get your invitation, and I appreciate you reaching out. And I think we have known each other for a long time, and our paths have crossed in many different ways. So it's good to be here with you today. So my role currently at WG Content, formerly Writer Girl, is EVP of Insights and Growth. I've been here for 10 years, but I've spent most of my career in healthcare. So I've always been in roles where I've worked with organizations in building solutions that meet healthcare needs. And so I spent a long time working for an organization that provided concierge services inside of healthcare as both an employee benefit as well as a service to patients and caregivers. Spent some time consulting, spent some time at a social media agency, and then have been here for the last 10 years. But kind of the common thread has always been this sort of healthcare component, and partnering with healthcare organizations.
Awesome. I'd love to jump in. Before recording, we obviously were talking a little bit, and kind of on reflection, it's like self-admittedly we're technical and kind of analytical by trade, and there's just so much flood of function and features and AI and technology. It's like we almost sometimes forget that it's people at the end of the day in the middle of all this communication, and it's people that are going into probably the most sensitive moments in their life. In healthcare, that we need to lead with empathy. Tell me kind of how you view trying to stay in that lane and how you view the state of empathy within healthcare right now.
No, I appreciate this conversation so much, especially right now. I think that you're right. Like there's so much sort of formulaic and technical and all of those things are important. We can't, abandon those things and lose sight of those things. And I think those things are all accelerating to make us more efficient and more effective. But this idea around, we are all at the end of the day, human beings working with other human beings and delivering, whether you're delivering care or receiving care. And so this idea around, empathy and how do we lead with empathy and how do we really understand and build relationships and get to know the people that not only, really it's like, it starts with who you work with, right? And then it's also who you're delivering your services to, whether that's in healthcare or any industry, frankly, is just having this like very disciplined approach to understanding your audience. And I think that starts with empathy, because it's kind of like, I always talk a lot about, it's the know, like, trust factor, right? Like people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And so you can't just automatically assume that a consumer in your market is going to trust you because you have, great outcomes. You have to be able to build those relationships, get to know them. They have to get to like you. And that takes time and that takes effort. And that takes a lot of, really good storytelling and good communication and good connections and building those relationships. So I appreciate, the idea of this conversation and that, really focusing on more of the empathetic side of what you do and what I do and what we all do in this space, that really it is about building relationships and understanding how do you build relationships?
Yeah. And staying in my lane of analytics, like the thing that makes me resonate so much with this concept is like, I think the number of ebbs and flows somewhere in like the 60% range of content on the internet is duplicate. Or like if all we did was just continually to kind of not think of things uniquely, it's just that kind of formulaic view of like, what is a condition, why, what are the symptoms, what are like this very kind of non-human view of information. So this resonates so much of like, we have to understand you as an audience and you individually and the path that you're going through in your current moment in healthcare. And it's a good reminder back to people like us, but really just in general, the audience around healthcare and how we serve it.
Yeah. I've never heard that stat, but I'm not surprised. And, I think what you can't duplicate, what can't become redundant is someone's story. You can retell their story, but that story is unique to that person and to that patient. And you can't, that's their story. And so I think really bringing those stories forward is just a great example of breaking through what is out there today, breaking through what might be the redundant, repeatable kind of formulaic content that's out there, is like really getting to the heart of the stories, because that's truly unique to that person and to that, physician and that caregiver's family or whatever. I think the more you can tell those stories, the more it breaks through some of that just noise that's, and, there's important aspects to that, but we want to be able to balance it with good storytelling.
Yeah, that was actually, I think it was promoted by Google. It's funny, they did like a state of Google thing, and one of their own slides was like 67% of the internet is like duplicate content.
Oh, okay.
And like you can take that data point and what it means in a lot of ways, but to me, it really reflects that there's a lack of empathy in the state of content. Because if you really are speaking to someone individually in their moment, then that's a sample size of one. Like there is no way to duplicate that. So
I remember like years ago, I was talking to Larry Balin. I don't know if you know Larry. He's the CEO of Single Throw Marketing. And he said to me, it's not just about being found, it's about being chosen. And so it's that we had this really great conversation around the art and science of marketing and content. And, the being found is the real scientific part of it, right? It's all of the SEO, and it's, making sure that we're, considering all of that information, creating content that satisfies search intent and all that. But once they get to your site, you need to be chosen. So how do you differentiate? What stories are you telling? Does your visitor, see themselves in your content or in your photography or on your site? And I think that's the real artistic side, right? So it's really you have to be able to satisfy both. I mean, it's not just about being found, but it's really about being chosen. And if you can lean into the being chosen part a little bit more around how are we building relationships? How are we leaning into empathy? What are the stories that we're telling? What's making us really unique and different in our market? Why would someone choose us? So I think getting really just hyper vigilant about answering all of those questions, I think really helps satisfy that being chosen question.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know Larry, but it's funny. I actually listened to one of the conversations you had with him, and that really resonated with me. And I'd even agree with, he emphasized that more healthcare brands over-index on the being found.
Absolutely.
And I'd agree with that. That is the state of us. Like our group functions very much in the like helping being found. But we always then almost have that like handover conversation of, well, that's not the end of the journey. Like we know how to get the person to the door, but then someone's got to open the door and welcome them in. Like, and that's a really interesting bridge, the conversation the two of you guys had around that.
Yeah. And that both are important. You have to have both, and I think that's why, it takes a team of people to be able to bring that sort of, co-create these stories and co-create these solutions. And because it does take both sides of the brain really too, like the left and the right brain have to both be working and firing on, to be able to understand that art and science of what we do. I mean, we're trying to connect with people where they are in their moment of need and answer their questions. And that takes a couple of different disciplines to do that.
Are we walking towards the topic of personalization? Like in our world, there's so much, that term is thrown out a lot, especially in our world, of this kind of like personalization. But then it's like, how do you balance that? Like, how do you personalize content, but then produce and speak to it to an audience at scale?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it just takes, I don't know. I always think like the closer you can get to your target audience, the more successful you'll be, right? Whether that's like through like really studying your survey results from, patients, whether it's walking the hallways, talking to your admissions team, talking to your patient transport team, talking to your nurses, getting involved, like shadowing your physicians inside your organization, asking them questions, asking for their feedback. What are the pain points, with our current patients? What is the experience they're having? It's all crowdsourcing. It's like, however you're able to curate and crowdsource as close as possible to the person you're trying to connect with, I think the more successful or more effective you can be in building these relationships, because you just get to know them a lot better and you get to know their experience a lot better. Just getting as close to them as you can through asking those good questions. And, marketing, communications and marketing leaders are typically not on the floors, right? I mean, they spend time doing that, but they might be in their offices but I think, getting outside the office and walking the hallways and walking, like I said, talking to the nurse, going to the nursing stations and creating focus groups and committees. And I think those sorts of things can help. They give you that sort of line of sight around, what's happening on a day-to-day basis. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Do you feel like that's helpful?
Yeah, it is a difficult conversation because when we think about it, it's more on a kind of a technical and web experience of, I guess, every user coming to the site is unique in their state, but in a very practical sense, like you can't produce and personalize a web page of one. There's compliant, not to derail this conversation. There's so many things to factor into that, but there's just a practicality that isn't that as well. So it was interesting. You're navigating essentially sounds like the same problem in just the physical world, the real world of going like, it sounds like, if I'm listening to you correctly, it was like you could almost go in with a mindset of, hey, we're trying to crowdsource empathy around this patient experience. And then you may even bump into all the clinicians' experience with that patient is something we also then have to explore. And it almost becomes like a different mode of communication that patient's experience may also need some kind of empathy on the physician dealing with that as well.
Yeah. A long time ago, our CEO, Christy, she said something like, if it's good for the patient or the user or the visitor, web visitor, whatever the case may be, if it's good for them, it's good for search and it's good for being found. And it's good if you start there, if you start with them, what's on the hearts and minds of the people we're trying to reach and connect with. If we start there, it will satisfy all these other things, right? And so how you do that, there's different ways to do that. But as long as you're thinking like that, I think then you're on the right track. Because it does, going back to our idea, we were talking about the science and art thing, we have to be found. And so that takes all the things that you just described but we have to be chosen. And so, really understanding the ways to do that.
How does this just like current state of like flood of AI start to come into play? I mean, it sounds like you had some core principles and tools just around kind of walking the halls, the focus groups and things. Like, has the current state of just marketing and technology caused you to shift or think differently?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I think we're really enjoying and leaning into everything that AI can bring into how our work gets done. And it's really been fun and enjoyable to have these conversations with our clients and like think about all the ways that we can together create solutions that save them, saves us time, which then, saves them money. And I think it's a really nice opportunity for us to be able to add more value and do more work together as we introduce these tools into how the work gets done. But your question, I think, is really more about, how, the whole human aspect and the human side of all of this. So certainly that is something that we take very, very seriously and we're very passionate about. I mean, our value proposition here is we build relationships one word at a time. And we take that very seriously in terms of how we do that with each other, how we do that with our clients, and how we can help our clients do that with their patients and their consumers and their physicians and across the board. And that takes empathy, that takes human to human understanding. It takes a lot of things that cannot be delivered through, machines and formulaic sort of approaches and solutions. And so it's really important that there's just a nice blend of the two. So we have also even established and created some like governance around how we use these tools. Like we're starting with ourselves, like our own organization, like, okay, let's become kind of super users and really smart with how we're doing some of this stuff before we start, deploying and working with a lot of our clients with it. But it's really important to have that governance around when is it right and when is it not, and when do we want to pursue and when do we not pursue? And so we actually last year put one of our team members as the director of digital engagement to pursue AI strategies exclusively. I mean, among other things, this is one of her areas. And so she created a whole committee inside of our organization called the Pathfinders. And the Pathfinders all have different work groups, you know, in terms of what they're pursuing and looking at. And then, you know, adopting, okay, now we've done all the research in this work group. Here's what we'd like to suggest and recommend. And then we dive in, you know, and then we say, okay, we're going to start doing this and start doing that. Now, next is how do we, you know, translate this into adding value with our clients? Where does it show up and how does it work? And I think I just went off a whole different tangent of what your question was, but you brought up the whole AI, but I think it's really embracing both, right? It's like, I've heard Colleen, our COO, say it's like AI powered, human supported or something like that. So it's like, you know, making sure that both exist.
Yeah.
What are you guys thinking about as it relates to that? I mean, how are you leaning into it and using it? And
yeah, I'll answer your comment too, though, that definitely wasn't a tangent. I think that's kind of the heart of the state of we're all in.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, if you look at the model releases around these AI systems, it's like they're using the word empathy. Like they're trying to get to that point of going, these systems are more empathic. And that's a really unique spot that you're in to go like, well, on our side, we're producing content as we're speaking to the human end audience. But like, how do we then when do we introduce these tools? Where in the stage of process do these tools bring value? Where do they actually detract value? That's like a really interesting state you're in. Ours is a lot of trying to parse and understand unstructured data, which can come in the form of content. But some of it can be just analytical data that maybe isn't tagged or categorized in the same way, and then bring it into a structured format. That's a big piece that we're always looking at. Some of that could be parsing intent, especially from like a search or content perspective of trying to understand where these terms are and in some level of stage or navigation or information. Some of it's as simple, and I don't know if you guys bump into this, but like some of it's just as simple as the language they use to categorize themselves internally. Something as simple as like the word to a department. And you'll find within all their different systems internally, they're using a different acronym or a different language. And we'll have to use models to kind of grab those and then simplify complexity into a single term. So they're all speaking the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're going to continue to see iterate. I mean, obviously it's happening already. I mean, improvements and iterations. And I mean, I think it's like you said, it's a tool that it will help us. I mean, I remember I'm older than you. I don't know how much. We talked about our kids. So you've got little ones and I got, older ones. But I remember my last semester in college, they were offering a course in the library on how to use the World Wide Web. Like it really was not a thing my last semester in college. And then I graduated college and then there was like I remember, you probably don't remember this, but like there was I think it was like AOL Messenger or something. This was like, and then I moved to Cincinnati in like 1997 and I moved here there were no cell phones, there were no GPS, there was no websites to figure out where I'm going to live, things like that. And then I started one of my first jobs and they were like, well, we think we might build a website. Like people are starting to build these websites. Like, I don't really know, but I think this is how people are going to start finding information, And then I remember like a year later, they were like, yeah, we're going to start having email addresses. Like instead of like faxing and phone calls, we're going to have email. And then there was voicemail. And I recently was talking to somebody about this and I was like, I feel like I haven't been working for a long time, but my career shows like the introduction of technology and tools and digital application, all these things that just make us do work more effectively and efficiently is just constantly there, So I think going back to the AI is just the next phase of that, right? I mean, that's where we are today and it's going to help us do a lot more things. And then guess what? A few years from now, you and I will probably be like holograms doing our podcast, like it won't even be us anymore. It'll be like, hey, I'm just going to send my hologram to that conference. And, we won't even be showing up, which would be really sad if that's the case. But I think that's just the nature of things, right? I mean, we're just advancing and innovating and iterating all the time.
Yeah. And a total funny side note, one of our developers was literally playing around with the Notebook LLM that like produces podcasts. And they were like, well, we could take Bryan's voice and we can feed in all the past conversations, and like we can just produce podcasts without him. And it's like you're in that really funny moment of headspace where like, yeah, but like that kind of removes the fun of it.
I know.
But is that the point that we're all working towards? Like,
right. I'm like, I don't know if I really want that. Like, that's not something that I would, but I think I suppose that's probably already happening in some regard. Like the idea of like virtually showing up. I mean, you and I are not in the same office right now, but we're meeting virtually. That this idea of like holograms and interactive, I don't even know, but maybe it's coming. Maybe it already
definitely is. Deepak Chopra made a statement like years ago that he has a version of himself that goes on like CNBC and all these things that like, yeah, I mean, and that's years ago. So I'm sure it's happening a lot more than we already know.
So does that kind of stuff excite you, or does that make you pause?
On a personal level, it always makes me pause first. That's just like how I function, and just like want to think a lot more critically about something that like essentially removes the humanness of us. But it's funny because I listened to a conversation of him then explaining what like his viewpoint was that it gets his message and it gets him to reach more audience because he essentially is literally like duplicating himself. So there's a really fine line moral argument there that I think we could derail this call in a very different direction. I'm curious. You made a really interesting point though of your timeline of kind of technology and efficiency. Have you seen like our market or our consumers' awareness of the need for empathy change along? Like, is there a heightened awareness now with AI and AI overviews and all these? Or is there more an education that we have to make to the market because they think the tools are the focus?
I would say I feel like we're experiencing both, but I would say, I mean, if you're in healthcare, I think naturally you're probably a very empathetic person. You know, you're in there, you know, because you care about the health of whether you're directly, you know, delivering healthcare or you're supporting the teams that do that. I think that everyone has a shared interest in creating healthier communities, right? And so I think that the question of like, how do we compete in like, let's just talk about search, you know, like, so search intent is the whole search landscape is, you know, changing and it's, you know, we're all navigating this path. What makes the most sense? What are the best solutions? And I think it's understanding like, where do we optimize and where do we focus and where do we spend our time? And so it's like, okay, if people are going, and I think in healthcare, and maybe you know this data better than I do, it's like, what is it, like 67% of searches on Google get an AI overview or something like that. Whereas like other industries, it's like less than 20%. But because people go, I mean, healthcare related questions is like one of the top related search things on Google. Like people are constantly going there to ask questions around, I have this weird symptom, or I had a condition. Like it's like those questions, right? That can be answered within the search environment. They don't necessarily need to go to a hospital. That's today's world, right? They can get their answers within that search environment. So how do you satisfy that? And what's the value proposition of that? You're building credibility and authority, and maybe you're showing up because you've got really good content and you're bringing in your, you know, experts and your providers and physicians into, you know, answering those questions. But then how are you getting them to your site? And so I think it's also just looking at optimizing for those conversion opportunities, you know, talking about your doctors and talking about your appointments and talking about your location and, you know, talking about those things or having content around those things that help drive people to the site.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of really interesting points. I think one data point that may speak to that is there was a really huge study recently that came out that analyzed, I think it was like 300 million search queries. And they found somewhere, I think in the 40% range were brand related. And it really emphasized not only as AI overviews are coming, that's just shortening the real estate and the boxes of the potential for your brand to get associated. But it also really, to at least what I hear, is not only are you trying to find empathy in the information to share to that audience or that patient, but where and kind of what medium as well, that there's so many other areas that people are looking for information and potential exposure to your brand before they then come to search,
Right.
and they're already
Yeah.
then potentially informed about your brand. So like if that resonates, does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Of like how to even then think about
Yeah.
the localization or the medium that you're transferring that information to them?
Well, and even just the, how people use like a chat GPT versus Google. I mean, when you go and, because I'm sure you use both, when you go and do a search query, do you interact with those differently?
From how I
Just for you personally, like
prompt it, you're saying?
Yeah. How you
Totally.
prompt it, like what search queries you use. Is it different for you? Like how you would go to Google and search something versus how you would go on a chat GPT to search for something?
100%. Yeah. Chat GPT is such more nuanced, more conversational, more long format, more questions where at least we or I have been trained to be more term based when you go into a search platform versus question based.
I think those kinds of things too. It's like, I feel the same way. Like if I go on chat GPT, I'm like, I know, and I can trust that I'll have an opportunity to clarify my, ask the next follow-up question. And I have that one-to-one, experience in that query versus on Google. You have to be really, okay, what is it exactly I need? And what is the exact question I have? So I think even just the way, I guess my point in sharing that or asking that question is, I think just even the way people are searching for information is changing too. So it'll be interesting to see what's ahead there.
Yeah. Anything you can leave us with and how you're thinking about kind of like upcoming trends or focuses within trying to be more empathetic?
Oh boy. I always believe that, if you have a culture in your organization of empathy, right? And you have empathetic leaders and empathetic teams and all those things, that the work that you do will naturally be empathetic, and working with your clients will be empathetic. And then for our clients too, our healthcare clients, the more that's infused in their brand and their culture and their organization, and they're living it out every day, I just think it naturally and organically flows through how they perform, how they do their work, how they select their partners, how they measure the success of the campaigns and the work that they're doing, how they, going back to our, conversation about crowdsourcing and curating them, the more important that is, like how they're collecting that feedback. So I think it just takes, focus, discipline, time, effort, those sorts of things. I don't know if that's helpful, but I think that's, kind of what I would think about.
I think it's very helpful. I mean, I'm sure there's some content marketers in organizations maybe that don't feel that they have that kind of empathetic support in kind of both directions as well, but just hearing the reinforcement of just like how important and powerful that is, and arguably probably even more so now as things just get so much kind of put through the technology crank.
Yeah. Well, and it's so hard to measure. Often it can be hard to measure the success of marketing, right? I mean, there's ways and data and things that we can share and show. But I had one of my clients recently said, well, I think the best way is say, well, let's stop doing it. Let's just take marketing away and then tell me what's the value of marketing. And I was like, you know what? That's a very good point. Yeah. Because it drives so many things, right? And I am a big believer in even changing the conversation from marketing to communications, because I really think it's about communicating health, communicating. It's really more of a conversation, more so than it is like marketing. I'm here to sell something. It's like we're communicators, communicating and educating and inspiring and informing, and that is feels different to me. So I like using that sometimes more than marketing.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting ending point that will almost bridge us to another conversation, because it's in our world too. Then the categories underneath that are brand and performance. And there's so much emphasis on performance marketing and kind of what's the proper kind of seesaw balance of thinking about brand versus performance. And there's an immense amount of data around, and a lot of anecdotal examples of Airbnb and Adidas of like accidentally pausing their performance marketing and seeing no drop in sales. So there's certainly a precedent to have that conversation on.
Well, it was really nice to have this chat with you, and I appreciate you inviting me to join you.
Thanks for listening to Health Impressions. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Leave a review to help us improve and connect with us on social media. Keep exploring, learning, and pushing boundaries. Tune in again soon.